Now, you guys have met Mr. G quite a bit. I wanted to introduce you guys to my other pug. This is Chewbacca, the Wookiee pug. And she just turned 13 years old. Welcome to week 7. Here we are. So I'm combining the writing exercise and lecture today into a single video. Writing exercise is to write another prose tanka. So if you remember last week, that's just a sort of my own form. It's based on a Japanese form. And I want you to write a sentence in 31 syllables. This time, instead of taking a walk, I think you should be taking walks anyway, but instead of this week, I want you to just write a tanka about something that you made as a child. Something in your childhood that you made at school or at home. My example was that I made a paper towel holder with an engraved Mickey Mouse figure on it in shop class. And so I'm wondering why I had chosen a Mickey Mouse engraving, but that's another story. So the writing exercise, again, another prose tanka, a sentence in 31 syllables about something you made when you were a child. I wanted to, for the lecture, the next 2 weeks we're going to kind of dig into the various parts of the David Lehman essay. In his introduction to the great American prose poems. And because it's such an amazing introduction, he really does such a thorough job of explaining the form. This is on page 13. The best short definition is almost tautological. The prose poem is a poem written in prose rather than verse. On the page, it can look like a paragraph or a fragmented short story, but it acts like a poem. It works in sentences rather than lines. With the one exception of the line break, it can make use of all the strategies and tactics of poetry. Just as free verse did away with meter and rhyme, the prose poem does away with the line as a unit of composition. It uses the means of prose towards the ends of poetry. That's at the top of page 13 in the Lehman introduction. And I wanted to point out, so as we're reading these prose poems, even the ones that seem like short stories, like The Story of the Body by Robert Hass, you might read that and think, well, this is a short story. And you also might look back at some of our short stories that I gave out the first couple weeks, and think, well, how is that different than Robert Hass's The Story of a Body? And the truth is that we could sit and just argue about what's called a short story and what's called a prose poem. The beauty of these forms is that they're sort of breaking down the lines between genre as we sort of now consider it. I will say with like Robert Hass, he has a very strong use of image and metaphor. You know, that work, even though it is guided by a situation and a character, it's much more driven by image and metaphor. An image of the bowl of the bees with the petals on top. Or if you look at Mattia Harvey's work, she's another prose poet in that handout. Like The Transparent Heir Apparent, that's a story. It feels fairy tale-ish, right? There's sort of a prince who's invisible, so it's making use of distortions, and fiction writers, of course, do that. But it's really that piece is full of great sounds. She's using all sorts of alliteration, of assonance and consonants, and all these other sort of sound tools to add surplus meaning to the story and to the idea. If you have story in prose poems, a lot of times it's not character driven. It's more situation driven. It's more of a metaphor. It's forming a comparison. I'm not using the word allegorical because that's a whole different kind of story. The last thing I just wanted to say, if you think about poems, the way they really so poems written in verse, the way they make a lot of meaning is through the use of that poetic line. And so in what comes at the end of the line and what comes at the beginning of the line is always emphasized. It's just a visual apparatus of the poem, that those words at the ends and beginnings of lines become charged. On top of that, depending on how long the line is or how short the line is, the rhythm of the poem shifts when you have a line ending. Because of that, the meaning is slightly altered depending on whether the rhythm is very fast or whether it's slow, or and the last thing that a line does, that a sentence does differently, is that there's conflict between the sentence and the line. In other words, you may have one sentence made into 5 or 6 different lines, and that conflict between the line and the sentence is quite wonderful in verse. So in prose, you don't have that kind of functionality that the line does. But what you have is you have clauses. You have dependent clauses. You have independent clauses. You have all the sort of the equipment of the sentence, which we talked about last week in the sentence vocabulary, or you kind of worked that out actually. And so the words at the end of independent clauses and dependent clauses, the words that move, sort of around sentence connectives like and but, those words become very charged in prose poems. That's why I had you guys underline and bolden words at the end of clauses and at the end of sentences. Because that's sort of similar, or you could make a comparison to the poetic line, that those words that sort of begin and end clauses and begin and end sentences are charged in a way that the line emphasizes the last word in a verse line. So those are just things to kind of pay attention to. The last thing I'll say is that my pug is barking, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause this and figure this out.